Let's go ahead and get started on how to prepare for the future of OT cybersecurity. We will be recording the session. We will share this with everyone after the fact in case you need to duck in or out. We appreciate if you could stick around. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go. We do have some preloaded ones that came from some of you. Appreciate the effort you took. We'll try to get to some of those as well. If anything is missed, we will try and follow up after the fact with responses. So without further ado, today you'll be hearing as you may or may not have come to some of our webinars before, you've met me. My name is Rick. I'm the VP of Solutions at Verve. I've been in OT security for about 23 years. I get the pleasure of working with my new colleague since we've been acquired by Rockwell, Mr. Nicholas Creeth, who's a Senior Product Manager, Cybersecurity Services, over 15 years of experience in the automation industry, including sales and delivery. And Nicholas works a little bit in the front end of portfolio looking and hearing. So we're going to start with some of the trends we're seeing out there and the challenges that are being faced by people such as yourselves. And then I'm going to come through being frontline delivery, some of the case studies of what some of your peers are doing. So active opportunities to achieve some of these objectives and overcome some of these obstacles. So as a note, for those of you who don't remember, you've seen and heard some Verve marketing. We have been around for about 30 years in the OT space. We do have a very comprehensive suite of products, services, and support capabilities. We are going to leverage a lot of that to share with you today a day in the life and what we can help you potentially avoid. And we recently were acquired by, of course, Rockwell Automation, which just expands our capabilities on multiple fronts. So thank you all for coming. And Nicholas, your intro's over. I hope you're ready to go, bud. I'm going to slide advance for you and take it away.
All right. Thanks, Rick. Good morning, everyone, and appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us. So as Rick mentioned, we're going to talk about some trends in the OT environment, and then Rick's going to get into some use cases. So let's talk about what's been going on today. Over the last several years, there's been the growth of many enabling technologies: cloud computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, IIoT, or the Industrial Internet of Things, IT/OT convergence. And a lot of these enabling technologies have really driven productivity, efficiency, and decision-making within the OT environment, and have really helped manufacturers and those within industrial automation do things better, faster, and more efficiently. But as these enabling technologies have been utilized more and more within the OT environment, that's been growing the overall threat landscape. So as we utilize technology to help us grow and behave in a better way, it also allows for there to be additional threats introduced into the overall environment. So there's things like targeted attacks or more sophisticated attacks where there's different techniques and practices that are used by threat actors to gain access to OT environments, and also supply chain attacks. So with great technology comes additional vulnerabilities. We're going to dig into 5 of these trends in the next 15 minutes or so. And then we'll talk about what you can do to kind of safeguard yourself and how to deal with these trends in your environments. So if we go to the next slide, Rick. First, we're going to talk about remote work. So you can see the statistic at the top. From 2005, remote work has grown by 160%. And that's really been increased by the pandemic, where a majority of folks globally had to work from their home office. And as companies tried to enable folks to do that, there may have been a little bit of a lack of security. But now coming out of the pandemic, the new normal is essentially a hybrid workforce where employees are going into the office maybe half the time or maybe 75% of the time and doing work offsite the remaining amount of time. So there's a lot of benefits that come into this, where there's increased employee satisfaction because there's a way that you can allow your schedule to work, minimize commutes, spend more time with family, take on more obligations. Also, from a perspective of skill sets, we can utilize resources that used to be just tied to one office. Now they can support multiple offices and be able to use that enabling technology to help drive efficiency and productivity across multiple sites. For example, a hybrid employee working from home may take into consideration that that's growing some additional vulnerabilities. When you're in your home office, you need to consider utilizing tools like a VPN to ensure that your data is being encrypted as it's going to your central location or your company site, you need to ensure that you use something like multi-factor authentication to not only secure yourself with a password, but also use a secondary means to identify your access. And then also having a strong home network and that's secure. So sometimes I'm a remote employee. I like to go work at a coffee shop, and that increases the vulnerabilities almost tenfold. You're going onto a network that's not secure. You could potentially be at risk of losing data. So these new responsibilities are now things that companies and folks need to think about as they're going through this hybrid motion of remote work. So utilizing and safeguarding yourself is paramount. And some of these challenges that you're going to see, as mentioned, is going to be those networks are insecure. There's the potential entry points for threat actors to gain access, whether that's if you're at a coffee shop or even at your home office. There's measures that need to be put in place to ensure that you are in a secure environment and that you're limiting the vulnerabilities that do come into play while you're working remotely. So things to consider, again, utilizing multi-factor authentication to add a layer of security beyond passwords, enabling endpoint protection on your devices that you're using in a hybrid work environment. So ensuring that there's anti-malware or antivirus on your PC. So in case something were to get onto that PC, it could get quarantined and segregated from affecting either your PC or additional network components within that infrastructure. Utilizing secure remote access to ensure that you've got a direct connection within your company's environment. And also one other thing to think about is going to be utilizing third parties. So a third party coming in to provide preventive maintenance or some type of support, you're wanting to understand how they access your network and also provide them policies and procedures to ensure that they're coming into your network in a safe way. Because the advent of utilizing third parties is growing and growing over time. So those are some considerations with regard to remote work. Let's move into the next trend. Rick, if you could advance the slide. So looking at the Industrial Internet of Things, or IIoT. By 2025, there's supposed to be 25 billion connected devices. Now, that number sounds staggering, but a lot of these smart devices have allowed us to be more productive, more efficient, and to overall work more effectively within the OT space. Things where we used to need to go down a line to check on certain devices all happens automatically. In some cases, firmware gets updated automatically and automatic patching happens. So it reduces the amount of maintenance, it reduces downtime, but again, it's introducing additional points that could have vulnerabilities that somebody could enter into a network. A lot of the benefits here are going to be around real-time data, where we can do things immediately as opposed to needing to shut down a process, looking at optimized operations, getting more data about what we're doing so we can make better decisions. If we think about a sortation facility, all of the devices that are identifying everything that's happening as packages are moving through, all of that data then gets aggregated and allows there to be better decisions made with the flow of that package or of those products moving through that sortation environment. So being able to utilize those smart devices and then make better decisions and work more effectively is impactful and positive for a majority of the folks here, where it's going to help us drive better processes, it's going to help us be more productive and more effective. But again, there will be the challenges. Some of those being expanding the attack surface, so additional points where threat actors can get into the environment, the increased complexity. Just imagine managing 25 billion assets, like the amount of effort that goes into that, understanding what each asset is doing, where it is located, how it is operating, ensuring that the data going between all these assets is secure. And finally, how do we then manage all of those assets? So some things to think about here, considerations to take, would be what are you doing around developing the current network that you have? ensuring that the network has the capacity to handle the amount of devices that are there, also growing the network in a way that allows for multiple more devices to come on, whether you're adding in a new line or adding in new capabilities within your environment. Being able to segment that network to allow for there to be areas that should be off limits or more secure than others, and putting the right controls in place. With that many assets now in the environment, having a good asset management plan. How are you going to manage all those assets? How are you going to identify where they are, how they're operating, what needs to be done for each one, and what are the vulnerabilities associated with each one of those assets? So being able to then also implement a vulnerability management plan around how do you eliminate risk from having so many assets? Where are the areas of key focus, and what can you do to ensure that those assets are safe and that you can be productive without without increasing your overall risk to your process? Rick, let's move into the next slide, please. So with all of these devices, now you have all of this data, and utilizing and managing all of that data on site could be cost prohibitive, could be hard to scale the architecture. So many companies have been moving to cloud computing over the last several years. So as you can see by the statistic here, 81% of organizations will be using cloud-based applications by 2025. So with all the data that's going through from all these devices, needing to manage that, organize it, and then make it useful requires massive computing power. And having that on site, again, could be cost prohibitive. Utilizing a cloud vendor where you can store all of that data in the cloud, process significant amounts of data, and then get the actions back of what you want to do within your process are going to help you drive efficiencies as well as limit some of your costs. And now, as the increased adoption of cloud-based applications is happening, identifying ways that you can utilize that to help reduce costs, to reduce your on-site burden, and then to help you scale better. Instead of creating all of this infrastructure on your own, where you're needing to add physical hardware, you could just work with a vendor and get additional cloud space without worrying about having to scale in your own environment. From there, we can look at some considerations around what you need to do with regards to utilizing a reputable provider, making sure that the security requirements you have are going to be the same as those from the provider, and that they're going to provide you with the encryption and the support that you need for all of your data to ensure that, again, it's secure and that there's the data privacy laws that are in place to support your requirements. And as you identify a provider and then make sure that your data is protected, maintaining security controls so you can understand and monitor what's going on with your data, potentially having very important data stay on site while all of your other data can go into the cloud. But putting the appropriate policies in place, making sure that that's shared with your provider so you can get the most out of that environment. Rick, can we move to the next slide, please? Now, I was at the Gartner Security Conference a few weeks ago, and the buzziest term probably in all of tech these days is around artificial intelligence. I couldn't go to a session, be on the show floor, or talk to anybody without there being artificial intelligence spoken about in terms of either cybersecurity or in terms of overall production. So as you can see by this statistic here, that 70% of industrial organizations plan to invest in AI or machine learning in the next 2 years. So the adoption of AI has been happening for a while now. There's been various use cases within OT around predictive maintenance, around being able to identify different states within your environment so you can be ahead of the curve, whether it's on bearings degrading or anything like that. So there's been use cases for that that have been utilized to date. But now it's been proliferating into security and really driving capabilities around automation and making decisions quickly and effectively to secure your environment. For example, let's think about threat hunting. In the past, you would need people to look at the tactics, techniques, and procedures of a threat actor, and then identify ways that they would go into your environment and identify different threats that could be there. Now that can be built up in an AI model where it takes in all of that information and starts searching your environment for various threats that could be hidden within your environment, which you may think are secure. It can help you identify these threats in a more efficient and effective manner. And depending on how the AI is developed, it could do that extremely effectively, utilizing very clean data, utilizing and being tested with different data models and measures to ensure that the data that's being used is to the highest degree, can allow for there to be significant impacts into not only production, but again, then your overall security plan. So again, with the advent of great technology, there are these challenges. So there's bias that could happen. So really needing to ensure that as you're training any AI, that you have the appropriate data to help train it, that there is no bias where it makes a wrong decision, and that there are things like hallucinations that could happen. So really making sure that as you're building out those models and creating learning practices, that the model is sound and that it's using very high data quality. And one of the things that was mentioned at Gartner with regards to AI was from a company perspective, or even within a company from a specific group, identify what your AI roadmap is going to be. What are your use cases going to be? How do you want to use it? Do you want to use it for production? Do you want to use it within cybersecurity? And then are there partners that you're going to utilize in cybersecurity, let's say, that utilize AI within their tools? And then understanding how that AI works and how that will be supportive to your environment and the goals that you're trying to achieve. Putting together acceptable policies and use cases for the ways that you want to integrate AI into either production or cybersecurity, and then put together a plan and how you expect to utilize the technology, as well as train your people to ensure that they understand how it's used and what the impact that's going to have on your overall production or cybersecurity. And then finally, moving into the last slide, Rick. So as mentioned in all of these, in remote work, in the industrial Internet of Things, in the cloud computing and AI, we're growing the attack surface every day with all of this technology, but we're also getting better at what we're doing utilizing these enabling tools. So with regards to attacks are getting more sophisticated and targeted. 62% of organizations have experienced a sophisticated cyber attack within their OT environment in the past year. So as we build up countermeasures, as we patch vulnerabilities, threat actors are identifying ways to then get around those countermeasures, or are looking at ways to find additional new vulnerabilities. As we introduce newer technology, different vulnerabilities pop up, and then we need to patch them or take some action. Gone are the days of where you would get an email or a phone call from a prince from a far off land who says, hey, if you give me $2,000, I'll give you $2 million back. Like that phishing scheme from maybe 20 years ago, it is no longer what we're seeing today. The amount of utilizing the tactics, techniques, and procedures and utilizing various ways to gain access into IT and OT environments is significantly increased, where there have been complete websites developed that you would receive a email that says, hey, it's your HR department, we need you to change a password. You click on a link, it goes to a website that looks exactly like the environment you would expect, and you go through and then accidentally malware or your computer is locked out. So as our technology evolves, so do the attacks and cyber threats that are there. So what can we do? Rick, if you go to the next slide. So taking all these things into consideration, a lot of positive things here. But with all of these emerging technologies, we need to make sure that we understand what our risks are, what our vulnerabilities are, and we build up capabilities to ensure that we can be as secure as possible. So in the rest of the talk, Rick's going to go through use cases and different ways that you can ensure that your environment can be secure and less susceptible to all of these vulnerabilities that are in the marketplace.
Thanks, Nick. That was great. Great tee up to the topic today, and certainly a long list of things to be concerned about. And just of perspective, obviously in the OT space, we've got a lot of challenge ahead of us and sometimes limited resources, and so we could either focus on any one of those sorts of scenarios, like advanced persistent threats or attack vectors, et cetera, which we absolutely need to do, but we also need to make sure we do it in a sustainable and scalable way. And so rather than trying to individually or proactively attack any one of those individual ones, we're going to approach this as, how do we build the most robust and reasonable program for operational environments that covers people, process, and technology across an entire standard or guideline like the NIST CSF, which is the basis for many regulatory expectations around the world, which includes identification of assets, but also into protection of them, detection, recover, and response. So a programmatic approach is what's key. And what I'm going to hopefully do today is walk you through a little bit about what some of your peers are doing. Now, first, a cautionary tale. Some companies are achieving this in a couple of different ways, or at least approaching this a couple of different ways, right? I mean, this is, after all, IT. Just taken into OT. Maybe we could just extend. Maybe we could do something on the perimeter. I want to know better. I want to know more, but there's a sort of a whole can of worms over there that I maybe don't want to open in the volume and depth and breadth of risk and legacy equipment, et cetera. So let's just walk through a little bit about what a couple of these are doing. The first most common thing that we see is people trying to make things fit. They've got existing IT tools. They're being told, look, this is interesting. Let's take this same for example, vulnerability dashboard and take it into OT. Using the same technology, the same approach. This can be risky. These tools were never originally built for IT, for environments outside of IT. They were never built for OT. They're not really, I put up their PLC aware. So we need to be mindful of what we're doing there. Now, many people don't necessarily just blindly rush in with these tools, but what is a very common byproduct is they are taking these tools in and going as far as they're comfortable, and then realizing that the gap either needs to be addressed manually or is just not yet addressed. And so they're getting a partial picture. And while that's valuable, it's better than nothing. It is short of what is possible. And so when we get in and understand 10 or 15 or 20 or even 40 or 50% of our risk or vulnerabilities, that's great, but it's really only the first swing, and we may be missing some bigger picture items that we can correct, around network segmentation, or, as Nick said earlier, secure remote access, because that remote access doesn't extend just to IT or average everyday people working in the business environment. We are finding more and more need for expertise and scarce expertise in OT and risk to be able to be brought in remotely to multiple sites, either from the vendor or third party. So, we need to be careful when we just try to simply do the easy button and come in with stuff we've already seen. We need to make sure it's purpose fit. Is it showing us what we need, and are we seeing enough of that? This other option that some people are doing is saying, okay, let's go find something specific to OT, but they're still afraid to touch. In my 23 years of doing this, there seems to be two groups, and it's especially obvious when you see regulation emerge. There's the two mindsets. When something like a regulatory, you have to do this, there's no choice, we've been painted into a corner. There's the group that says, what is the minimal amount I need to do? And I want to do that and put it behind me. And the others are like, okay, I get the intent of what we're trying to do here. How do we do it right so we can sustain it? And the second is harder and takes longer. It doesn't necessarily mean it's 10 times more expensive or 10 times more effort, but it is a different approach. And so what happens when you take the minimal approach? We are looking at things like the easy button and say, oh, well, let's just, listen to the perimeter and look at traffic. We're going to do intrusion detection. As long as I know when something's about to happen, as long as I have a fire alarm, should something be going wrong, I'm far better off than I am today. But the reality of that is, you're relying on being impenetrable at the outside. And if you're wide open on the inside, then the potential impact is potentially catastrophic, right? We used to call it the M&M defense. It's hard and crunchy on the outside, but soft and squishy on the inside. And it's a valuable component, perimeter monitoring. It's something that's required to be able to understand what's happening, but it cannot be the totality of your program either. So what are we seeing? Well, what we're seeing is that the real benefit and the real insights from clients, and I'm going to build this up a little bit as to why it's of value, is getting to the endpoint and getting multiple other indicators of risk, including perimeter traffic and perimeter behaviors, into a multi-dimensional understanding of your risk. If we're trying to achieve defense and understanding and awareness across those 8 different domains that Nick did a great job running through, we need to make sure that we understand our risk profile from multiple perspectives. And so what we're seeing clients doing is at the very base level within the operational environment, using an approach whereby we go actually to the endpoint. We want to get on the endpoint. We don't want to hope we can hear from it or infer data from it. Or many people are trying to go to middle layer databases like an investment in maintenance and management tool sets or IT type CMDBs or ticketing systems. Those are valuable additional or secondary sources of data, but they cannot be your primary source of data. So we are seeing clients go directly to the endpoint. They're getting a significant amount of detail. A lot of these endpoints right from the OEM manufacturers actually are architected to allow you to navigate multiple layers and cascaded segments as well. And so when we approach this OT environment from an OT perspective, and we start to look and think and speak like OT people and OT tools, we get much more value and benefit and depth into those OT assets. And so first you start with an endpoint approach into the assets, which is the bottom layers here. You see agentless and agent-based or software-based connection, which allows us to be right resident on the assets. And that gets brought back to a single middle layer type of database. Now, there's a couple of really significant benefits about this middle layer approach. The first is we have an asset-centric base in this middle layer database. And that asset-centric base lets us build additional context around that asset record. So the first thing we've got obviously is from the endpoints themselves, deep detail about every single card in a rack and serial IO hanging off the back end and versions of software and running configurations from Hirschman rail switches and Stratix firewalls, etc. So we've got a really good base, but here's where the magic comes in. We start to pivot to those 8 different domains. The very first thing we want to do is append to those asset records additional context about the asset context that we can't get electronically or from other databases. So for example, if we speak to anyone running your environment, we can ask them which HMI or production line or safety system is critical. And is a 5-alarm fire, should it go down or be stumbling? It's already built redundancy because we know what it is. Those are our highest criticality assets, and they need to be labeled as such. Because when we get further down the path to build something like a backup or disaster recovery plan, we are going to escalate and prioritize those over some of the other systems we also know we have that are redundant or safe potentially on the alternative for testing patches or testing updates or security and risk reduction. So already with the second layer of information, we're educating ourselves, or rather institutionalizing data that we may already know in pockets into a singular sort of source so that multiple people can benefit from that understanding. So they build the second layer of data in terms of OT context, its impact to operations, its logical or physical location, in some cases, contact information for the team or individual that's responsible for those assets. Should we need a real-time event? Should that monitoring component tell us, hey, something's going on, now we need to spring into action? Well, knowing which systems are in scope and who to contact is really, really quite powerful. The third layer of data they want to get, though, is where we start to get more looking like IT. So we're able to bring in vulnerability data, patch data, exploit data, et cetera, to then start to further layer the risk and the profile of the assets and the actual concern into each individual device. And so we're building a third layer of exploits, patches, vulnerabilities, et cetera, and really starting to build a 3-dimensional understanding of these assets. And this is going to become real apparent how powerful this is in a couple slides here. And if you can, we're also seeing those secondary data sources that some lead with and say, well, I've got an antivirus list, I've got a patching tool, and I've got, they have some information for me. Let's grab those backup, antivirus, allow listing, and other third-party tools that we've already invested in, and pull those status of the individual assets and those protections back in here as well. I mean, we do have, as we know in OT, and especially as illustrated by what Nick laid out there, it is a multi-dimensional defense in depth approach across technology, of course, but it's just the enabler, your policy, your procedure, people's awareness, their understanding. And the only way to first build it, but then also benefit from it and maintain it, is to also have that same structure for yourself and understanding of the different mechanisms and levers you have to pull. Now, one of the things that Nick alluded to that wasn't maybe necessarily explicitly pulled out is the reason why there's so much remote work and so much additional IoT and et cetera is because we continue to try to leverage less and less skilled resources across more and more assets. And so if we're building, as we build our plan forward and how we're going to build an OT security program, we build towards scalability where we can scale and share scarce resources, then we're going to need an enterprise-wide view or an enterprise model to see the multiple sites. If we do that, we benefit from being able to take that scarce set of IT and OT working side by side on behalf of the environment to build a consistent and applicable response for OT assets. And remember, when something like DCOM comes out, it's going to mean different things to different assets at different facilities. But understanding that allows as an organization for us to prioritize when to go fast, where to go first, where to go second, and also maybe where to stop. Because we don't always have to get things to zero. We may not ever get all vulnerabilities to zero, but knowing where we stopped and why and being able to have an intelligent discussion about that is what makes the difference in this space. So why is this a benefit? How do we take that data collection and turn it into something of value? This is exactly what we're seeing, the next generation or evolution. Now, there is a white paper that I was just reading last night, actually, on exactly how these work together. If you're interested in how you build contextual risk scores, it's really quite interesting. I'm going to walk through the highlights of it here, but again, if you want to do it justice, I highly recommend reading it from our team of customer success members who work very much frontline with exactly, your organizations and our existing client base. So right from the mouths of the frontline practitioners, this is what's turning the needle up and really increasing the security maturity. Essentially, what we're doing is we're taking those different components that we just built in the asset inventory and the profile and the context, and we're adding score to them. Okay, so what is the asset type? Is it a switch or a PLC? Is it part of a safety component, safety system? What are its dependencies? And some of these are very important when you look at specifics of vulnerabilities, like if it's a network-based attack vector versus a local attack vector, where this device sits and its proximity to the business network or the DMZ can increase or decrease your risk or your concern. Looking at the device itself, and again, when we go to that endpoint, not only do we see if the vulnerability is present or the patch is missing, but we can also see how it's configured. The number of devices that are built with just a standard basic Windows install, and unfortunately, in many cases, the base Office package of applications to get Excel for ladder logic also include things like PowerPoint and Access or dormant administrative accounts from FAT and SAT efforts. And so looking at how the device itself can proactively be locked down is another aspect you want to pull in here. This gives us a raw unmitigated score. And then what we do is we add other dependencies or other things. Remember, I just talked about pulling an antivirus whitelisting and backup status or other compensating controls like microsegmentation, et cetera. What we want to do is get all of those different aspects of the device itself into a risk score. And instead of saying, well, we've got 23,000 vulnerabilities, where should we start? We can go say, look, I've got critical systems with poor cybersecurity configuration, patches that are missing, and by the way, the backup failed last night, and we suddenly have a very contextual understanding of where we should start, as opposed to opinion, hyperbole, and conjecture. So what clients are finding is that when they build this very dynamic mathematical calculation, all of the political and personal opinions are removed, and we're dealing very effectively with actual risk based on multiple indicators from multiple sources and investments. The cool thing is, if you build that system the way I just showed, as you go and take action on these devices, these scores are calculated again with the new components, and your score will update dynamically. So what does that then lend itself towards? Again, that scarce resource, the ability to pivot into different moves, knowing how far to move and how fast to move, relies upon what we call think global and act local. So what think global, act local is the aggregation of the data across those multiple sites. If you remember from the architecture slide, it did show multiple databases up into a single reporting. This is very much the future of OT. It is revolutionizing the speed and accuracy with which OT practitioners can act. It is leveraging very scarce resources. It is absolutely minimizing the diversion of engineering and engineer staff and support staff and operations into being cyber practitioners. And I'm going to walk through a little bit about how that works and then show you two very different and impactful case studies of actual operating companies that deployed this type of scenario for two very different purposes. The first, let's talk through it a little bit. So the concept of Think Global, Act Local is we're able to pull data from those environments, like we just said, with an up into a middle layer aggregation and normalization, and eventually up into a high level reporting or read-only. Once we've gathered that many different data sources, if you remember the multi-layered build here of asset information plus operational context plus third-party risk indicators plus in-house investments in things like backup and whitelisting, et cetera, we can pivot as a collective group, as OT security practitioners, into any one of those requirements. And it could be driven in a reactive session, such as a new vulnerability has been released. What does it mean to us? Or it could be proactive in, hey, let's look at our lifecycle management tools and status of our various components, and what can we start to build or plan out for the next upgrade or capital budget, et cetera. In all cases, the view up here is predicated on those multiple sites and multiple data views and inputs, but then it allows us also to take action. So one of the things about the recommended technology for collecting the data is the ability to remediate risk as well as simply enumerate it. So one of the easy button concerns is if we simply go and listen to traffic and we look at what we think is out there, that is a read-only source. It is, here is a status, you need to do something about it, you leave that tool, and now what? When we have that same remediation built into the same tool, we can immediately sort of start to direct that activity, and most importantly, take the action under controlled circumstances. And again, there's lots of detail in the case studies, but then execute those actions in an OT safe manner and see how that activity then results in our overall scoring and our risk profile. And so this also allows us to build trends and track progress over time. So what does it look like in practice? First case study. So it's a large operating company with thousands of miles of assets to monitor, that a distributed team of SCADA security and compliance members throughout North America. And obviously a SCADA deployment is usually either pipeline or transmission. You can decide which one this is. Thousands of assets comprised of varying OS types, thousands of network and switch gear, and thousands of PLCs. And all assets are spread out across hundreds of physical sites and a couple thousand miles in terms of distance, many of which are unmanned or support maintenance is farmed out to local, regional, sort of third-party organizations. So on the left is what they typically started with, and this is a perfect example of a reactive scenario. So something like Bluekeep came out, and what happened was, as typical, dozens of people in spreadsheets were generated and brought to a meeting. There were multiple meetings set up with an every other day cadence of Monday, Wednesday, Friday, checking in with each other and updating and triaging and prioritizing and redirecting. Many guesses and assumptions were made, unfortunately. At one point, 2 interns were being assigned to log into a host of Windows devices that they saw on the network, but weren't sure what they were. And so they were using default login and password to try and get in. And once they were in, they would hit start, run, and look at the programs. And if they saw something like Maximo, they'd go to the maintenance team. If they saw something different, they'd go to a different team. And so unfortunately, it's very common, but it's also very time consuming and prone to error with manual efforts like that. They then started patching where they thought they could. And again, remember, they're tracking everything back in a spreadsheet. So the manual feedback into those devices, the sometimes skeptical understanding of the criticality of those assets made some of these decisions very difficult to make. And manual tracking then becomes the norm. In total, there was more than 6 that started, but in total, it was roughly the equivalent of 6 FTE for 10 full weeks, which reached about 2,500 hours to reach, in general, only 90% coverage of patching or reducing the risk. No compensating controls were deployed. They either patched or didn't, or they accepted the risk or what have you. And a significant touch point. All these engineers and operational staff diverted from their day job to run around and do this sort of manual tracking. Now, that same organization, a year or so later, had a think global, act local type of approach with automated capabilities, et cetera. The central team had a 360-degree or multidimensional view of all assets. They started with an accurate list of in scope by type, location, criticality, owner, and function. And so the kickoff meeting in this case, when the next version of Bluekeep came out, was a very small set of key personnel with some outbound updates to various management and key stakeholders. The first task, this was in response to Bluekeep, was to proactively disable remote desktop on all assets. If you remember, one of the specific technical components and why this is such a valuable thing is we're not just reacting to the name of a vulnerability with a patch, we're actually deciding what we need to do in which order. And so in this case, when we looked at the technical details of Bluekeep, it was primarily attacking remote desktop and the guest account. And so in an operational environment where people either sat at the console or they locally came in and were manually or physically there because of the high touch, high risk nature of this environment, remote desktop was almost never used on any of these devices. There were jump boxes to allow people into DMZ layer stuff around HMIs or historians, etc. But the vast majority of the assets didn't need remote desktop. And so they were able, with that automated technology, to simply disable it immediately, no impact to anybody, and an immediate reduce in risk while they then had the time to figure out how to react to the patching. Patching team then deployed all the files while they were in the meeting. They automatically deployed patch files to all the systems in scope, didn't actually deploy anything, but they went to that view and decided from our 1,500 Windows-based assets, these are the ones we want to test on. And when I mean these are the ones, they were able to select redundant domain controllers, file servers, legacy equipment, secondary HMIs at low impact environments, etc. They were able to pick a representative sample that allowed them the comfort and capability to test without actually potentially impacting operations. At some of the higher risk environments or the more far-flung geographic locations, they were then able to set up, because the file's ready and the systems in scope, we call it local, but local to that facility. So way down the line, those techs came in and were prepped with everything that had gone before them, the testing results and the capability, et cetera. They went to oversee the actual patching. And then those that they couldn't patch, they applied minimal risk. So disabling the guest account, for example, and disabling remote desktop and whatnot. All progress was reported in live dashboards, and the total effort was less than 3 core staff and about 400 hours total to reach 90%, and the remaining 10 were removed through compensating controls. So if we look at this, we're looking at about a 70% reduction in effort and similar or better understanding of risk and compensation, but all manually tracked and reporting. So nothing said over here about the accuracy of the reporting, but that's an underlying benefit that also comes into this particular use case. So that doesn't convince you, that's fine. Or maybe that's something that we want to aspire to, but first we need to know more about where to start. This is where many people are today. In other words, I know I need to do something, but I'm not sure where to start. So the second thing you can do with this type of multidimensional view is build a very powerful assessment into a roadmap. So I'm going to walk through a second scenario. We actually had an organization deploy this particular architecture and then engage their trusted experts to come in and do a deep assessment and take that assessment and turn it into a roadmap. So the client itself was a global manufacturing company. They deployed endpoint management automated reporting, I think global, act local, just like we're talking. The immediate findings were over 400 devices not patched for high impact, older vulns. So obviously they were falling behind. They found multiple shadow IT, dual homed machines running TeamViewer, people bypassing the secure remote access or the firewall between IT and OT. They found 47 dormant admin accounts that all belong to departed employees, missed settings and password policy, and a large percentage of end-of-life assets. So really this, when you look at it at first, is just confirmation of what we already suspect. So how do we turn this into something valuable? Well, first we want to summarize them by function. The end goal, we talked about this earlier, defense in depth, is the endpoint. And to protect it, we need multiple other disciplines of policy, procedure, and of course, technology, but more importantly, people executing. And being able to direct your people on what to execute where and how fast and how much is key. And so you see here, we found a whole range of findings, some of which I gave you the highlights, but across multiple vectors and capabilities or attack vectors and remediation capabilities. We are going to share this, so I'm not going to read through all of the findings. So happy to share this with anybody and follow up any sort of questions. But the idea is that when you're that far in with that many different perspectives, your assessment can pivot into, well, yes, I'm looking at the endpoint, but I can see from the endpoint those dormant admin accounts, right? Or the lack of change in passwords, et cetera. So you can see violations to policy and procedure. You can also see shared accounts being used for navigating different jump points and whatnot. So we take this benefit and these findings and we build a roadmap. Now, it's important that when we build a path forward, we take into consideration a couple things. The first is that we're building a program. One of the other things, if you look back to the concern I said that many organizations have, is if we simply extend an existing tool, we're leading this by tool or we're leading this by individual function. We need to be able to understand how any short-term or immediate or upfront decision impacts downstream capabilities. I'll give you a quick example. If we don't have the right understanding of not just the IP addresses and what's sitting at them, but that operational impact and that importance to OT, we're going to have a hard time justifying or right-sizing an incident response and backup and restoration program, right? So we need to make sure we understand that we're not just solving this one tree in front of me, we're actually worrying about the forest we need to navigate. And if you do that, you build, and these are the two recommendations in here, is a remediation plan or program that addresses people, process, and technology, resourcing, procedures, endpoint network, and visibility, and that you build it into a reasonable path. Okay, we typically, generally, not always locked in stone, it depends on the environment. We typically recommend first phase is what we call basic or building the foundation. If you're familiar with CIS 18, these are common concepts, but is a really practical approach. So we want to build basics. Can we do the low-hanging fruit right now, like those dual home systems, disable them, and like remove those dormant admin accounts and harden some systems or remove software that doesn't need to be on there? The second layer is a little bit more sophisticated where we start to peel off project-based work, like, hey, we really need a centralized or standard secure remote access, or we've got pockets of backup and restoration, but it's piecemeal and it's not necessarily tested, and we kind of rely upon the fact that when we run it, it's actually good to go. We want to be more robust in that. So you can build programmatic and project-based approaches. And then the third is where you typically look at, we really do have some life cycle challenges. We need to do some forklift work. It's going to take many, many years in capital budgets. But the idea is that we want to eventually get to more mature in terms of having, security language baked into procurement. You'll start to see that come through. We want to have, forward-looking activities and exercise and what if ransomware happened or what if these could be tabletop or real world. But the idea is we want to take the vast list of things to do from the previous couple slides and make it manageable. Here's the other thing that this lets you do. It lets you decide resource allocation. Many organizations want in-house and staff. Many others rely heavily on contracts and managed services. No matter what, we need to know how much needs to be done by when and where. And so when we look again, in this case, it's CIS 18, but it's equally applicable to NIST CSF or NIST 2 in the UK. It's also applicable to any other regulatory environment. We need to know who's going to do what, at what frequency, across what function, and you're going to need different resources and skill sets. Hence, the value of that centralized view across multiple sites and leveraging those scarce resources. The next thing that you're able to do from this is take, as an example, that long list of phases and build it into a sustainable and manageable roadmap. In this case, we're actually looking at executing different components across the different segments: network segmentation, backup, secure configuration, and look at, you see, we're also looking at iterative phases in here, right? We're seeing backup phase 1 into phase 2 and eventually into phase 3 down here. We're not trying to boil the ocean, but we're trying to logically and sequentially increase step-by-step our security with multiple people in different areas to try and build this. And this is all completely extractable and plannable if you start with that data set to begin with. What's the result? This is kind of a third case study. One of our North American clients first attempted to, or was required to, comply with a regulatory expectation in the form of NERC-CIP. That is why they were high on governance and awareness. North American Power, if you go to any site in the world, you'll know the executive named in charge of NERC-CIP, and you will also see posters everywhere about not sharing passwords or holding doors open. Good start, but the real security and risk components are usually fairly low. This was a self-assessment by a multifunction regulated power company in North America. And they were on NERC-CIP, which is the blue, but they were measuring themselves against the NIST CSF, which is, of course, the basis for NIST 2, TS, the others. They then did the deployment of a think global, act local type of scenario where they're able to pull their data in, get a better understanding of system configuration, of patching, where they should start and stop and draw the line with those calculated risk scores, et cetera. And then they reassess themselves. And as you can see, again, back to looking at the forest and the programmatic approach, they made improvements, two different dimensions here, on almost every single component of the NIST CSF, start to finish. But even more interesting is that they significantly increase, in some cases infinitely better than before, but in most cases 2 to 3 times better than what they started at. And so there's real value and real proof in doing this. This isn't just us saying, hey, this is a cool idea. There's real demonstrable capabilities in here. So I'm going to switch to a summary slide, and I'm going to run through a little bit. Nick, feel free to jump in a couple on theirs, and if not, once we're done, we'll open to any questions. As I mentioned earlier, feel free to add to the chat. As Nick pointed out, cybersecurity risk and focus is on the rise and on multiple fronts. OT environments and specifics of that legacy equipment and operational nuances make that task even more challenging. And the shortage of skills means automation of tasks and sharing resources is a requirement. I cannot state this enough. We're struggling to find cybersecurity people. And no offense, I've been in OT for 23 years. When we hire young, capable kids and they get to go work at a large energy company and somewhere cool in terms of city or the cool part of a city, and they're immediately put into a regulatory go comb these websites for security updates and update a spreadsheet for me, they quickly decide to go work somewhere else. Everybody wants to chase the bits and bytes. This is not going to get easier, at least not while we're all employed. It also means more outsourcing, staff augmentation, and managed services. So as Nick pointed out, secure remote access, the prevalence of IIoT and a different data sources and data analysis to allow you to take smaller amounts of people and cover larger amounts of territory. And AI can help. But as Nick pointed out at the end, we need data to feed it. If it's data starved, it's potentially not as valuable as if it has as much as possible. So what should you do? As I mentioned, we should start with a programmatic approach, not an individual function approach. Individually tying individual tools to individual functions means you end up with a collection of tools that are not connected and hard to navigate between. And if we've already got a scarce number of people, that becomes even harder. Ensure you're focusing on the endpoint. It is, after all, the crown jewels. And unfortunately in OT, it is the one with all the weird and wonderful quirks. It's maybe Windows XP. It may be Server 2003. It may be something that runs 24/7 and hasn't been rebooted in 5 years. We can't simply look at trends and patterns and expect to understand the nuances of the actual systems in scope unless we go to the scope. And most importantly, data context and automation. We don't put some sort of automation and understanding of how far we need to go, or what we like to call what does done look like. Again, one of our clients the other day, 23,917 vulnerabilities. You'll never get that to zero, and it doesn't make sense to start at the top of the alphabet. So what context do we need to understand how far we should go and what's good enough? That summarizes my set of slides. Nick, is there anything you wanted to talk to in terms of bringing forward some of the stuff you'd shared earlier?
No, I think it's just reiterating everything you shared. Implementing a security framework, being able to use something like NIST CSF to help identify ways that you can work within your organization, building your strategy so you can ensure that you're putting things in place to build your security posture. And then as you're going through your strategy, just ensuring that your team is educated, making sure that all the folks are in line with a security culture. It's not only good to implement a strategy, but also building a culture within your organization that really focuses on and fosters security in all environments.
Yeah, good point, Nick. Thanks for the content. Open it up to question here. I've got one to start with. Does the shown architecture capable of gaining asset and vulnerability insights also somehow enable vulnerability management? Very key component. Yes, the delivery of patches features, and enable integrate with other data sources. So yes, I think this was asked earlier as we're getting into the role of things. 100%, we want to understand, and thank you for the tee up. When we're looking at the backup status of an asset relative to how quickly we need to act on the vulnerability that's present, do we have a recent backup? Do we have a fallback point? That will increase or decrease our urgency. But the first part, again, this is the single biggest difference for everybody. a lot of people seem to forget that it's great to have data and understand what's out there. If we don't have a mechanism or a method to act and remediate on it, we've really only done half the job. And so thank you for the question. Yes, Verve, as we mentioned earlier, when we use our technology for the endpoint, at least on OSs, we're able to actually remediate and patch those devices. Now, everybody always asks, hey, you're part of Rockwell. There's two big questions that come. First is that no, we're not suddenly just going to be Rockwell. We've been non-Rockwell for 29 and a half of the 30 years we've been in business. We do have lots of vendor neutral capability. We do definitely want to continue to extend that, and Rockwell is supportive of it. But the second part is that we do have that management capability. And as we do the management on OS base today, that's great. Then the very next one we're going into is pulling in from Rockwell Asset Center its understanding of, there's playbooks often when you want to update firmware, for example. You can't just update the PLC, there's a prerequisite or a follow-on. Those playbooks and the ability to help plan those as well is the next evolution, next generation in our evolution, helping clients to be proactive in not just understanding or identifying, but managing. So great question. Next question. Great question, Michelle. Hi there. I've been in this field for around 8 years now, and it seems to me that challenge hasn't changed much. Why do you think that is? Actually, Michelle, I've been in it 23 years, and I'm still telling the same jokes and saying the same things, and people still think it's a value. So the reality is we are making progress. The challenge is that there's leaders and laggers in every industry and every geography everywhere. As I mentioned at the top, maybe you weren't online just yet, is that in every organization and especially when you go to regulatory meetings, there are those who say, I get it. Security is now going to be part of the culture, just the same way that safety is. I mean, security has the same mandate as safety, to safely get us through the day and do what we're here to do. Security, at least in OT, and certainly in IT, but even more so in OT, is not about trying to be bulletproof. It's about a reasonable level of risk reduction and tolerance and the ability to react to get back to normal and stay safe. And so when we start to get that and do put together programs and make decisions based on reasonable and practical approaches, we see maturation. There's another angle, and that is that we are still growing out of the legacy debt and technical debt that we've accrued over the years. We were excited 23 years ago to plug in TCP/IP and plug and play and see everything everywhere, not knowing the technical debt we were introducing. And so working that out of the system is going to take a long time. And unfortunately, we're just a bit slow to adapt, but great question. The reason I laugh is because, like I said, I say the same things for 23 years and I still get invited back to say it again. So I've got some great questions from Kyung. I'm going to take those questions offline for you in terms of, can you show the webinar again? Yes, we are running it again later today, but it will also be recorded and you will be given access to the recording. Thank you for the question. And Kyung, if you wanted to talk to me, just feel free. My email's up there. I'd be happy to connect with you. I've got some of my counterparts and colleagues in your region and would be very happy to discuss with you on that one. Nick, sorry, there's nothing huge on the research side. Your stuff is always valuable and capable, and I really do appreciate it, but it's not as sexy as how do you actually fix it and what's, the stats. So there's not a lot more questions here. At least we do have some, as I mentioned, that were written in. We will endeavor to get some answers back to those of you who did take the time. We do appreciate it. Also appreciate you taking the time to come here today, given that we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it here. Thank you all for coming. You will be receiving a follow-up email with a link to the recording, and please do share it with your friends, or as you can see on the screen here, there is contact information for both my colleague Nick and myself. If you wanted to dig any deeper on any of these topics, please feel free. Otherwise, have a great day, and thank you for spending an hour with us today. Take care.
Thank you.